Rosenbaum. That's the name that maybe he's the one that hung himself. I don't know. Rosenbaum's activities and connections underscores the Mossad's involvement in international narcotics trafficking and as apparent subsidizing of Lansky's ventures in Acapulco. Let me just say this: third part of of the great movie dealing with gangsters. You all know the name of it, The Godfather. Third part has this particular individual in it. You can watch it. I'm plugging it. Yeah, I know you probably watch it every year. And anyway, the Mossad's involvement in international narcotics trafficking and its apparent subsidizing of Lansky's ventures in Acapulco. Here we go. Let me read that again. Rosenbaum's activities and connections underscores the Mossad and their involvement in international narcotics trafficking, my goodness, and its apparent subsidizing of Lansky's ventures in Acapulco, where former Mexican president 1946 to 1952 Miguel Alemán had developed a chain of hotels and casinos. Alemán worked with a cousin of Italy's Princess Beatrice. The introduction was certainly made by Rosenbaum and deposited his money in the Banco Mercantil de Mexico, the corresponding bank to Bank Leumi, the Israeli banking giant. That's Leumi, so you can follow the money, okay? The Israel banking giant that served as a major laundering vehicle for the revenues of international dope traffic. Ooh, I'm getting more than I thought I was going to get. As reported in Dope Incorporated, I'm going to maybe look that up. Leumi, president, sat on the BCI's board of directors in Geneva and owned a company that moved diamonds between Israel and Hong Kong, a perfect channel for smuggling what? Drugs. James Angleton alone possessed the coveted Israeli account, and through his relationship with Italian royalty, Rosenbaum, Charlie Segosa, Hank Manfred, and Mario Bond, he was certainly aware of Lansky's central role as the mafia's banker in the Caribbean, where Lansky's mob associate from Las Vegas, Mo Dalitz, that's D-A-L-I-T-Z, Dalitz, opened an account at Castle Bank, as well as in Las Vegas, Mo Dalitz opened an account at the Castle Bank. Let me read it again. Remember Mo in The Godfather? As well as in Mexico, where Angleton's friend Winston M. Scott was station chief and certainly kept tabs on Lansky's associate, former Mexican President Miguel Alemán. As ever, Angleton and Lansky were the dark stars of the intelligence and financial aspects of international drug smuggling. Federal law enforcement officers knew all this, and that the prestigious Mary Carter Point Company had decided to build a resort hotel on Paradise Island in the Bahamas in 1965. This was perfectly legal, but when the company teamed up with the Wallace Grooves to open a casino, U.S. Attorney Robert Peliquin, having just conducted a narcotics investigation into Puerto Rico with the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, was sent to investigate. In his report, Peliquin cited a situation that was right for the Lansky scheme, but the venture went forward anyway because the CIA had hired Groves and Mike McClaney, manager of Lansky's Miami Beach dinner club, to suborn the Bahamian government. Indeed, the venture was not venture not only went ahead, but Pelican and former justice official William Hundley would leave government services and join in the profiteering by forming a private firm to provide security for Resorts International, the company that owned the Paradise Island Hotel and Casino. Ooh, my goodness. That's that big money. With the CIA running interference, the mafia washed its drug and gambling money in the Bahamas, Las Vegas, and Mexico. Then brought the cash back to Miami, where Lansky divided the proceeds among his investors. And you see how they can get an idea about money laundering when they're doing it themselves. In addition, let me say the Federal Bureau of Narcotics led to the DEA, okay, through the Phoenix Project, and I'll get into more of that later. The bag man included Benny Singleton, a farmer of LBJ's erstwhile personal secretary, Bobby Baker, ooh, my goodness, and Sylvan Friedman, a close associate of John Pullman, and Tibor Rosenbaum, who financed the link between Lansky and the IOS. Let me read that again. With the CIA running interference, the mafia washed its drug and gambling money in the Bahamas, Las Vegas, and Mexico, then brought the cash back to Miami, where Lansky divided the proceeds among his investors. The bag man included Benny Singlebaum, his partner of LBJ, that's Lyndon Baines Johnson's, erstwhile personal secretary Bobby Baker, and Sylvain Friedman, a close associate of John Pullman, and Tibor Rosenbaum, who functioned as the link between Lansky and the IOS. So the plot thickens. Now we're seeing how we go up to events around 1962, 1965. Who was responsible? Who's hooked up with this? They had the money right there. Millions of dollars they could offer somebody to kill JFK, Malcolm X, or to bribe people up in New York to do it, as well as, of course, Martin Luther King. Lansky was the financial means. For the decades, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics kept him under surveillance, hoping, in vain, to tie him up in narcotics conspiracy cases. He never went to jail. In November of 1965, in the midst of Castellini, Nebbit, and Burka affairs and the emergence of the Lions Gang, Al Garafola wrote a report on Lansky's French Connection Associates in Nice, based on the document. Federal Bureau of Narcotics headquarters concluded that Lansky's front men were traveling the world to purchase drugs and make arrangements for their bosses' smuggling operations. But the mingling of Mossad, CIA, and Mafia funds in offshore banks provided the crime lord with an invisible protected shield. When it came to Meyer Lansky, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, as ever, was stymied. It could only do what had been done for years, and that was to make cases on individual drug smugglers. And we're not going to read any more of this book because you see every sentence gets us into more details. I'm going to move to this one real quickly by way of deception. When Jonathan J. Pollard, 31, and his wife Ann Henderson Pollard, 25, were arrested in late November 1985 after a failed attempt to gain asylum at the Israeli embassy in Washington, the predictable political fallout focused attention for a time on an embarrassing and explosive question: does the Mossad actively operate in the United States? Officially, the Mossad says no, 1,000 times no. Absolutely not. Indeed, Mossad katzes are forbidden even to carry phony U.S. passports or use U.S. covers in their work. So delicate is the situation between the State of Israel and its larger and most influential supporter. How to explain Pilate then? Easy. He wasn't Messiah. Rather, he had been receiving $2,500 a month since early 1984. He had been from an organization called Lashka the Krishna Madia, or the LAKAM, LAKAM, the Hebrew acronym for the Israeli Defense Ministry's Scientific Affairs Liaison Bureau. A secretary at the Israeli embassy, LAKAM, was then headed by Raphael Eltan, who publicly denied any connection, but was a former Mossad Katza who had taken part in the 1960 abduction of Adolf Eichmann from Argentina. The plot thickens. Pilate, a Jew, worked in research at the U.S. Intelligence Support Center in Suitland, Maryland, near Washington, part of the Naval Investigative Service. In 1984, he was switched to the Anti-Terrorism Alert Center in the NISC's Threat Analysis Division, an odd transfer given the fact that he had previously been warned by the security officials about leaking information to the South African military attaché, and his new job gave him access to considerable classified material. It didn't take long to determine that Pilate was sharing this information with the Israelis, and when confronted by the FBI, he actually agreed to cooperate with them in getting his Israeli contacts. He was placed under 24-hour surveillance by the Federal Bureau of Information and panicked and sought asylum. He and his wife, arrested as an accomplice, were stopped as they left the embassy. Naturally, the Americans demanded an explanation after a telephone call from U.S. Secretary George Shultz in California to Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres at 3:30 a.m. Jerusalem time on December the 1st. Peres, who set up LAKAM himself when he was Deputy Defense Minister in the 1960s, formally apologized. Spying on the United States stands in contradiction to our policy. Such activity, to the extent that it did take place, was wrong, and the government of Israel apologizes. Peres went on to say that if government officials were involved, those responsible will be brought to account. The unit involved will completely and permanently be disbanded, and necessary organizational steps will be taken to ensure that such activities are not repeated. All they did was change the mailing address and attach LAKAM to the Foreign Affairs Department. But even if Peres didn't really mean it, his statement seemed to satisfy all U.S. administration. Former CIA Director Richard Helms said it wasn't uncommon for a friendly nation to spy on each other. You do what you can. Getting caught in sin, he said. And while the Pilates were carted off to jail for spying, the Mossad considers LAKAM raw amateurs in the craft. Schultz later told reporters, "We are satisfied with the Israel apology and explanation." After a brief flurry of unhappy publicity for Israel, the controversy died. Suspicions lingered, of course, about Pilate's exact status, but it seems that even the CIA believes that, apart from the odd, questionable exercise, the Mossad, except for the liaison, simply does not have operative activity in the United States itself. Well, they're wrong. And this is according to Ostrovsky. Let me keep reading there. I'll show you his name later. Pilate was not Mossad, but many others actively spying, recruiting, and organizing, carrying out covert activities, mainly in New York City and Washington, D.C., which they refer to as their playground, do belong to the special super secret division of the Mossad, simply called AI. Hebrew for above or on top. I think that's an I, could be AL. understand what we're saying here. The unit is so secretive and so separate from the main organization. The majority of Mossad employees don't even know what it does and do not have access to its files on the computer. But it exists and employs between 24 and 27 veteran field personnel. 3 as active KATSAs, that's KATSAS. Most, though not all, of their activities within U.S. borders. Their primary task is to gather information on the Arab world and the PLO, as opposed to gathering intelligence about U.S. activities. But as we shall see, the dividing line is often blurred. When in doubt, AI doesn't hesitate to cross over it. To say it doesn't gather information on the Americans is like saying mustard is not the main course, but you do like a little on your hot dog. Say, for example, there's a senator on the Arms Committee whose interests Mossad, who interests the Mossad. AI rarely uses this synonym, that's SAYANIM, but that senator's paperwork, anything happening in his office would be important information. So an aide would become a target. If an aide was Jewish, he or she would be approached as a Sayan, S-A-Y-A-N. Otherwise, the person would be recruited as an agent or even just as a friend with whom, to mingle and listen. Pillow talk. The Washington cocktail circuit is very important for that. Certain attachés keep track of it. There is no problem adding someone to that circuit and giving it a legitimate ring. Suppose, for instance, McDonnell Douglas wants to sell U.S.-made airplanes to Saudi Arabia. Is that a U.S. issue or an Israeli issue? Well, as far as the Institute is concerned, it is Israel's business. When you have something like that in place, it's very difficult not to use it. So they do. One of the more famous AI's activities involve the theft of research material from some U.S. Aircraft manufacturing firms to help Israel secure a 5-year, $25.8 million contract in January 1986 to supply the U.S. Navy, shipboard, and Marine Corps with a 21 16-foot-long drones or unmanned Matzlet Pioneer I-1 aircraft, plus the accompanying ground control, launch, and recovery equipment. The drones, which have a television monitor mounted underneath, are used in military reconnaissance work. Matzlet, a subsidiary of the state-run Israeli Aeronautical Industries and Tadran, won the contract after outbidding U.S. firms in 1985. Guess what? That's all, folks.